There are moments in history when the greatest danger doesn't arrive with the sound of explosions or the headlines of breaking news. Instead, it creeps into homes silently. It settles into families unnoticed. It disguises itself as normal life until one day people wake up and realize the world they trusted no longer exists. Most people think these moments begin with political crises, economic collapse, or war. But what if every visible crisis is only the symptom of something much deeper? What if the real battle has never been political at all? What if an invisible war has already begun, and most people don't even realize they're standing in the middle of it? The warning you're about to hear has shaken countless people because it forces one terrifying question. If the greatest danger is spiritual, would you even recognize it before it was too late? Every generation believes it is living through difficult times, but every so often a generation arrives at a crossroads unlike any before it. A moment when old certainties begin to disappear, when confusion replaces conviction, when truth itself becomes negotiable, and when people slowly stop asking what is right and begin asking only what is acceptable. At first, the changes seem harmless because they happen gradually, but that is precisely how every great deception begins. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, just one compromise after another until entire societies forget what they once knew to be true. That is why the greatest warning is rarely about what everyone can already see. It is about what almost nobody notices until the consequences become impossible to escape. Look around for just a moment. Families that once prayed together now barely eat together. Communities that once shared common values now argue over the very definition of truth. Anxiety rises while peace disappears. Technology connects billions of people. Yet, loneliness has never been greater. Information has become limitless, yet wisdom feels increasingly rare. These are not isolated problems existing independently of one another. They are connected because every visible crisis points toward a hidden spiritual reality that most people have forgotten exists. And once you understand that connection, everything happening around you begins to look very different. The most dangerous illusion of our time is not that evil has become stronger. It is that people have stopped believing evil is even real. When people stop recognizing darkness, they stop defending themselves against it. Imagine walking into a battlefield convinced there is no enemy. You wouldn't wear armor. You wouldn't remain alert. You wouldn't recognize an attack until you were already wounded. Spiritually speaking, that is exactly where countless people find themselves today. They believe they are simply navigating modern life, while an invisible conflict quietly shapes the direction of their families, their decisions, and even their souls. But this isn't meant to frighten you. Fear without purpose only paralyzes. A genuine warning does something entirely different. It awakens. It opens your eyes before disaster arrives. Throughout history, warnings have always been expressions of mercy because they offer people something priceless. The opportunity to change before consequences become irreversible. Yet, history also reveals another uncomfortable truth. Most people ignore warnings because comfort always feels more convincing than urgency. Nobody wants to believe the danger is real until the danger reaches their own front door. That is why perhaps the first and greatest mistake people make is assuming spiritual decline happens overnight. It doesn't. A civilization rarely collapses. because one generation suddenly abandons everything. Instead, every collapse begins with small concessions. One compromise becomes two. Two become 10. Eventually, what once shocked society becomes ordinary, and what once inspired holiness becomes old-fashioned. The transformation happens so slowly that almost nobody notices it while it's happening. Only when looking backward does the pattern become painfully obvious. This slow transformation explains why confusion has become one of the defining characteristics of our age. People possess more knowledge than any previous generation, yet certainty continues disappearing. Everyone has opinions, but few possess conviction. Endless conversations fill the air, but genuine wisdom becomes increasingly difficult to find. This isn't simply an educational problem or a cultural trend. It reflects something much deeper. Whenever truth loses its foundation, confusion naturally rushes in to occupy the empty space. That confusion affects more than public debate. It reaches into ordinary homes. Parents struggle to guide children through a world whose values change almost daily. Young people inherit unlimited choices, but very little direction. Even those sincerely trying to live faithfully often find themselves asking questions previous generations never imagined asking. Why? Because uncertainty has become normalized. The extraordinary has become ordinary. The unthinkable has become familiar. And familiarity is one of deception's greatest weapons, because once people grow accustomed to disorder, they stop recognizing it as disorder altogether. Yet there is another reason this warning matters so profoundly, and it has nothing to do with headlines. Every great spiritual crisis eventually reaches the individual heart. Before societies fall apart publicly, people drift privately. Prayer becomes occasional. Conscience grows quieter. Small compromises no longer seem important. Spiritual discipline slowly disappears, not because people consciously reject it, but because life becomes busy enough to make neglect appear reasonable. Day after day, nothing dramatic seems to happen, until eventually years pass and a person realizes they no longer recognize the spiritual life they once possessed. This gradual drifting creates the perfect environment for something even more dangerous. Yes, once spiritual awareness weakens, discernment weakens alongside it. People become increasingly vulnerable to influences they cannot identify because they no longer possess the habits that once protected them. A soldier who neglects training eventually forgets how to recognize an ambush. Likewise, a soul disconnected from consistent prayer often struggles to distinguish truth from deception when it matters most. That may sound dramatic, but history repeatedly demonstrates the same principle. Every major crisis begins long before anyone recognizes it publicly. Buildings collapse only after hidden structural weaknesses remain ignored for years. Trees fall only after decay spreads beneath the bark. Likewise, civilizations fracture only after invisible moral foundations erode beneath the surface. The visible collapse simply reveals damage that has existed all along. This brings us to a question few people dare ask honestly. If invisible foundations determine visible outcomes, then where is today's deepest fracture actually located? Is it politics, economics, technology, or is it something far older, something far more personal, something rooted within the human heart itself? That question changes everything because it shifts attention away from blaming everyone else and forces each person to examine their own life first. Perhaps that is precisely why genuine warnings often make people uncomfortable. They remove the luxury of pointing fingers elsewhere. They remind us that history isn't shaped only by presidents, governments, or institutions. History is also shaped by ordinary people making ordinary choices every single day. Every compromise matters. Every act of courage matters. Every moment of integrity matters. Small decisions accumulate until they become the future itself. Yet, despite all this, hope still exists. In fact, hope becomes most meaningful precisely when circumstances appear darkest. Throughout history, periods of great confusion have also produced extraordinary examples of courage. Whenever truth seemed forgotten, individuals quietly preserved it. Whenever fear spread rapidly, someone chose faith instead. Whenever darkness appeared overwhelming, light never disappeared completely. It often became smaller, quieter, and harder to notice, but it remained still. Preserving light requires recognizing darkness honestly. Denial has never protected anyone. Pretending storms don't exist has never prevented rain from falling. Wisdom begins with seeing reality clearly, even when reality feels uncomfortable. And perhaps the most uncomfortable realization of all is that many of today's greatest threats don't arrive through obvious hostility. They arrive disguised as convenience, entertainment, distraction, and comfort. They don't demand immediate surrender. They simply encourage gradual forgetfulness. That gradual forgetfulness explains why so many people today feel restless without understanding why. Material success increases while inner peace decreases. Endless entertainment fills every spare moment, yet silence becomes increasingly uncomfortable. People chase fulfillment through achievement after achievement, only to discover that external success cannot repair internal emptiness. Something deeper continues calling. Even when its voice becomes almost impossible to hear beneath the noise of everyday life. But the story doesn't end there, because recognizing emptiness is often the first step toward genuine transformation. A warning is valuable only if someone chooses to respond. Every alarm offers two possibilities. Ignore it, and consequences grow closer. Listen carefully, and preparation becomes possible. That choice has confronted every generation, and now it confronts ours. Because what comes next is even more unsettling than recognizing cultural confusion. Once you understand how spiritual decline quietly reshapes individuals and societies, another question naturally follows. If confusion has become so widespread, who benefits from it? Is all of this merely accidental? Or does every layer of deception ultimately point towards something far more organized than most people ever imagine? That is where the warning becomes impossible to ignore, because the next revelation isn't about society anymore. It's about the invisible battle unfolding behind everything you've just heard. And once you see that battle clearly, you may never look at the world the same way again. And that is precisely where the choice before you becomes deeply personal. It is easy to hear a warning and assume it is meant for someone else. But history shows that every great renewal begins with one individual who decides to change before everyone else does. The battle you are witnessing is not ultimately won in parliaments, courtrooms, or television studios. It is won in quiet moments of prayer, in acts of obedience when no one is watching, in the courage to choose truth when compromise would be easier. Darkness may appear loud, but light has never depended on numbers. Throughout history, God has always worked through faithful souls who refused to surrender, even when they stood almost completely alone. That is why despair is exactly what the enemy wants. If he can convince you that everything is hopeless, he has already weakened your resolve before the battle even begins. But despair has never been the language of faith. Every generation of believers has faced moments when evil seemed unstoppable. Yet those moments became the birthplace of extraordinary saints. They understood something the world often forgets. No matter how powerful darkness appears, it remains temporary. Truth does not change because culture changes. Christ does not abandon his church because the world abandons him. And grace has never been limited by the size of the opposition. So the question is no longer whether difficult days may come. The real question is whether you will be spiritually prepared when they arrive. Preparation begins today, not someday in the future. Build a life rooted in daily prayer. Return frequently to repentance and sincere conversion. Fill your home with peace instead of constant noise. Protect your family by choosing faith over fear, discipline over distraction, and truth over convenience. Small acts of fidelity, repeated every day, become the strongest defense when greater trials eventually appear. Long before storms reach the horizon, wise people strengthen their foundations. Remember that you were not created merely to survive these times. You were created to remain faithful through them. Every challenge carries an invitation to grow stronger, wiser, and closer to God. The world may become increasingly uncertain, but your heart does not have to follow the same path. While others are consumed by confusion, you can be guided by conviction. While fear spreads around you, peace can remain within you. That peace is not the absence of trials. It is the confidence that no darkness is greater than the light of Christ. Perhaps that is the greatest message hidden inside this warning. It is not simply a prediction of difficult times. It is a call to awaken before it is too late. Every new day is another opportunity to begin again, to rebuild what has been neglected, to strengthen what has grown weak, and to renew your trust in God completely. The future has not been written by fear. It is shaped by the choices made today, one faithful step at a time. So don't leave this message as just another video you've watched. Let it become a turning point. Share it with someone who needs encouragement, because one conversation can change a life more than you realize. And if this message has spoken to your heart, stay with us, because there is much more to uncover about the spiritual realities unfolding around us. The next revelation may answer questions you've carried for years. And once you understand it, you'll never see the battle or your purpose within it the same way again.